Hi
Okay.
guys, it's Khalil, and we're back at it again with another roundtable on the second episode of what is turning into a little mini series on Did D-Day Matter? Looking at all different aspects of it through the World War II angle and through the Cold War angle as well. Just kind of like opening up that Pandora's box of D-Day and looking at it through the Western lens, looking at it through the Russian lens as well, and like how crucial it really was to Allied victory and even beyond. So we have a new guest here. You guys might remember Alex and Kanoa from the first episode. We were mentioning how we were going to bring in Liam, but Liam couldn't make it last time. So why don't you introduce yourself, Liam, before we head on to to Alex and Kanoa again?
Hi, I'm Liam. I am a architecture major at CU Boulder and an amateur historian, and I'm here to speak my mind on this. I've been studying D-Day for a while, so I'm excited to speak on it. Yeah.
All right, so why don't we go with Kanoa?
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm Kanoa. I'm a first year chem student at the University of Washington in Seattle. I went to middle school with all these three guys, so we're all really tight. But yeah, excited to be back again and excited to talk a little bit more about this topic that you know, I have a lot I don't have a lot to say, but I do have some things.
Yeah, what's up? I'm Alex. I've been on the show a couple times. Excited to be back. I'm a first year at Washington University in St. Louis, majoring in history and in Japanese. And yeah, I'm excited to continue our discussion from last time.
All right. So you guys know me, of course, but yeah, I didn't actually go through like my major in school officially. So while my school spirit isn't the best, I will admit I do go to Howard, Howard University. Um and I am a history major at the moment. I plan to double major in either political science or international affairs. I don't know which one. Um, yeah. So like heading back over towards the topic of today, did D-Day matter? Hopefully, anybody watching this would have watched the first episode on D-Day matter. You don't need to, but it'd be nice to get a more well-rounded look. We were talking a lot about the moral and the social effects of um, of the operation and just how important it was maybe to look back on or how it must have been to the people at the time. Just seeing all those men wash up on the shores of Normandy and in the morale boost it must have given towards the war effort. But this time, we hope to do a little bit more of a political and military analysis. We can still look at the social stuff, but there was one thing in particular that Kanoa mentioned that as I was watching over the recording myself, getting ready for the upload, I was thinking about, and that was what would World War II look like if D-Day didn't happen? We did a lot of looking as to like what the West as well as the US was doing before D-Day that was already crucial to the war effort. But what would World War II look like without D-Day? So anybody that wants to expand on that.
I can start off here. I think, and these are just my thoughts, that this again kind of ties back into the social and like cultural importance of D-Day. Um, is that is that no matter what, without that, the war would look. I think we can all agree that it had a heavy military impact, on the Germans almost instantly. Tying down resources, it's going to cause a lot more casualties. It expands the war. It's not and I think ultimately it made it a much faster process. But if you didn't have that, where would we be? You know, is is like is it going to be how long would that add to the war, and how and when you kind of add that sort of when you increase the length of the war, the cultural impact becomes different. You know, a quick war is not as good as a long war. You know, so it would I think if if it didn't happen, the an American campaign in Europe could possibly be remembered a lot differently. And I can't say the political impacts of that at the time. You know, maybe had it gone over for different years, perhaps if D-Day didn't happen. You know, how would that affect the American economy going into the 50s and 60s, which, you know, where would that differ from our real world? And like, um, I don't know, we'd have a all I'm saying is we'd have a much different much different take on it, and it wouldn't kind of be without D-Day. I don't think World War II would almost be seen as quote unquote the good war from the American perspective. Um, so yeah, sorry if that was a little rambly there.
No,
But
that was good. That was good. I think D-Day, if D-Day didn't happen, I think that the main point where it would change things is, like you said, in the 50s and 60s, specifically with the Cold War. And as recently as 2019, actually, I have an article up here from Reuters, I think that's how you pronounce it, which is just an account of how Russia's foreign ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said in around June of 2019 that D-Day actually shouldn't be exaggerated or it shouldn't have been exaggerated as much as it was, for the fact that they see it as it's over exaggerated in order to diminish the Soviet Union's efforts, is the argument. Obviously, this is coming from Russia. This is coming from the side that wants to, have all the credit, because Russia versus America, two opposite sides. And Russia didn't participate much in D-Day, not nearly as much as the Allies did. So I just think it's an interesting argument that glorifying D-Day and making it seem like it was vital to winning the war when it wasn't, sort of acts to also diminish the Soviet Union.
yeah, but it's interesting because that is almost kind of like a byproduct of this, where she's saying it didn't matter, but like evidently the fact that we're having that discussion, you know, where there's that rivalry in the first place, that
Ooh, okay.
caused by the invasion of Normandy, and that it is kind of interesting when you think about it, because like she's saying that, and it's like stop exaggerating it, but at the same time it's gonna exaggerate it, because if it was not such a grand event, why would it be even discussed like that in the first place? And why would there be that almost like subtle nationalistic rivalry that brings up like tension when it's discussed? So that's
if it's so non-important, then why would you be why would you be pushing back against it? What?
Yeah.
Decades later.
See, what I hear.
That's really interesting.
When I hear Zakharova say that, is that I really think about like the main part of like what would World War II look like without D-Day, and what World War II would look like without D-Day, regardless of like all the things that we've already mentioned last episode of what the West was doing, with the attempted Operation Tidal Wave, with the squeezing of the Axis forces out of North Africa, with and out of Africa in general, as well as the invasion of Sicily, southern Italy, and the Allied bombing campaign also. Like all those things, independent of D-Day, were having a big impact on the war effort. But D-Day cannot be forgotten in its military significance, as well as its obvious political consequences that we're going to get into if we haven't already. Because We have to think about everything on the Western, like, or North African theater in World War II, as it relates to the Eastern Front, because like most people um around here, and probably most people that will end up watching this, won't know too much about the Eastern Front unless you're like a mega nerd like any one of us. And without D-Day, you're gonna have a lot more casualties on the Soviet side. One thing that people need to remember is that after Operation Barbarossa, which maybe some people might know about, and the in Stalingrad and the near capture of Moscow, there was a huge like counteroffensive, a series of counteroffensives that over the years pushed the Germans and Italians and Romanians, the rest of the Axis side, back into Germany and eventually to Berlin. But if D-Day were not to happen, there'd be more casualties. And in our timeline, it was close to 20 million or more. As far as military casualties, it's obviously a bit less than that because so many civilians were killed as well. But there was a huge loss. Russia is still recovering from its demographic losses from World War II, as well as the other former Soviet states. If D-Day were not to happen, then those casualties would be up to probably 30 million or more, just because of how many German troops it tied down on the Western Front that could be used on the Eastern Front to push back the Soviets. So when I think of if D-Day were not to happen in World War II, I think about a possible exhaustion of the Soviet war effort, because there are historians today, contemporary historians and older ones back in the past few decades, that made the interesting presumption that if it weren't for that a continuation of the war effort, or a lack of lend-lease, or whatever, anything that would prolong the war and add to casualties would have a big impact on whether or not the Politburo in Moscow would revolt against Stalin and force a negotiation with the Axis side. So we have to think about that as well. Like, would the Soviets even be capable of fighting as if it wasn't for those division of German resources that had to be established once the D-Day landings happened?
I can I just say this? I think that you guys bring up some interesting points, but one question I would have to ask was that would the Allied West, without D-Day happening, would they still make a push towards the European continent, like the continental Europe?
Like,
Um, like as in would they still
Like separate
like
and like the Italian campaign, sort of.
yeah, so like what would happen in place of D-Day? Would the West still make a push that way eastwards towards Berlin, or would they not even try to fight in the European campaign at all?
Well, yeah, I think they would have to eventually, sort of like again, and I think we mentioned this in our notes. Like you had follow-up operations to D-Day, like Operation Dragoon, that cut to the south of France, and 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 there's multiple points of entry. So maybe in a possible scenario where we don't have that, it's we don't have D-Day. Maybe it's who knows where the Balkans getting invaded. It could be. I mean, there's a number of different scenarios, but again, I kind of think they're all kind of narrowed down to the point where it's like, okay, D-Day, or at least an invasion of France, was kind of inevitable. Um, because like you don't really have a lot of options besides that. Like, yeah, there was the Southern campaign that drew some Axis troops away from from the Eastern Front, but it got bogged down, and eventually that you have the Alps, you have a land barrier, so it's kind of like um, yeah, there's no, or like Norway or like Denmark, it's like that's those are kind of unlikely scenarios, like that's not really ideal. So it's like, I think at some point or another, a D-Day was going to happen. Yeah. So on the map.
Yeah, like a little map analysis. Liam, why don't you go first?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you just look at the map, like, I mean, the options are are Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. you know, and like, and again, this goes back to the kind of the political and social like kind of aspect of it, where it's like, I think in the previous episode you mentioned it's a reconquering of something, and so there's that morale aspect to it, and that obvious military choice. So I think it's kind of inevitable in the history of things, but almost just a matter of when. And it also, again, we have to consider when there's so many aspects of it. So it's like coinciding with the Soviet push. It's like, when would that timing come in? If the Allies delay it, the Soviets are gonna, you know, we don't know, but there's a greater possibility that they're gonna get bogged down and put increased, effort or increased pressure on the Allies to do something. And so it's kind of just like, when is that breaking point when the Allies are like, okay, this is vital to win the war, and we just got to do it. So I think an alternate World War II, where the June 6th invasion of Normandy doesn't happen, would be possible. But again, it might be August in in Flanders, or maybe not, but at some point you would I think you would see that. And yeah. And so ultimately, going into the question of, did D-Day matter, it's like, yes, because it happened in that particular place and time. But again, it could have happened anywhere. It was sort of inevitable to me, at least in my perspective. So
This is
if
where everything really starts to tie in, as you might come to see at this point. I have a map here that, it's actually meant to like show like Operation Valkyrie, which was the German partisan group to like plan operation to kill Hitler. But it is a good map nonetheless for what we're trying to do here, because it shows roughly where the maps stood, the war lines stood, as around the time the D-Day started. This is the bridgehead that was attempted, that the Allies were attempting to set after D-Day, about a month and a half after it happened. This is Switzerland, this is Spain, a lot of neutral nations, and a lot of like occupied territory in the red, but a lot of the gray, with the exception of a few like neutral nations like Sweden, Switzerland, Spain, and Turkey. This is all like Allied conquered territory in the gray. And so they push up through Italy, but it's, as you already mentioned, Liam, it's going very slow. And then they already took a lot of the Mediterranean islands, like the Madeiras, Malta, which they already had, Cyprus, and Sardinia and Corsica. And so there are multiple avenues of invasion into Europe that the Allied command was trying to think of. And interestingly enough, and again, this is where I say like a lot of this like connects, is that Stalin was actually begging the Western Allies to start up an invasion on the European continent to draw down forces, like a sort of like just to make it easier for the Soviet advance. Keep in mind, you guys can't see it, but Moscow is like here.
yeah,
After 3 years of conflict, they were able to push them hundreds of miles back to here. And Berlin is like here. So, they relatively they don't have too much distance to go, but at the same time they need something to draw down forces, and that was what eventually came with D-Day. The Italian campaign did that to a certain extent, but there's just way too many geographical factors involved in the Italian peninsula, like just mountain ranges and all different types of barriers that made it relatively easy to defend. And so it wasn't exactly the sort of operation that was going to tie down a million German troops. But out here in the wild, in the wide European landscape, that of which there could be many different flanking actions and an overrunning of German defenses, that was where D-Day struck. But as you can see here, all these invasions had to happen with relatively close proximity to Allied territory. And so, when they overran North Africa, a lot of this used to be Axis held territory about the year or two before 1944. They went and invaded Sicily because it was only about 50-ish, maybe 100 miles tops away from conquered territory that they reconquered. And then from there, invading Italy wasn't as difficult. They sent some ships over here, they sent some ships over here, some ships right across the strait, but it wasn't as far. For them to, for example, once they'd conquered Sicily, to invade Greece, that's a little more of a distance. Or for them to go conquer southern France, that'd be a bit of a distance. Now, they eventually did it from Corsica and Sardinia, I believe. That was their staging grounds, I believe, for Operation Dragoon, which Liam can talk about. I think he already did talk about. But as you can see here, they had limited options. And so D-Day was a really good example of this, because not only was it convenient, but it was also it had that morale boost, as we were talking about in the last episode, because it's roughly in the same location that French and British troops were pushed out of 4 years before, almost to the day. And so D-Day was a big cultural as well as a military objective. And so it was able to tie down German troops in the way that Stalin wanted it to, as he would mention over to Roosevelt, the American president, Churchill, the British prime minister, that he needed a front in the continent of Europe that would draw down Axis forces to make up for the tens of millions of casualties his forces were receiving on the Eastern Front.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a quick observation here. Sorry, Alex.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Just a quick we talk about all this morale booster for the Allied side, and obviously that's a huge factor in the invasion of continental Europe. However, you would have to see that an invasion from the Western side would also be a huge morale detractor from the Axis powers, right? They've been fighting this huge Soviet force since, ever since they basically invaded, and ever since Stalin started pushing them back past the Soviet borders. And then you have this other massive force that comes in from the West, right? Germany is basically caught in one of their own pincer movements from the early Soviet invasion, I believe. And I don't know, at least for me, if I was a German citizen at the time, that would be very terrifying to see all of your enemies just closing in from everywhere all at the same time. So this is kind of getting back into the social aspect of, did D-Day matter? Yes, because you have basically almost broken the Axis spirit by then. And that's just a terrifying thought. Nobody wants to lose, especially in something as costly as war. So that's just my quick observation.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, and then just going sort of with the whole idea of morale boosters and all that. Have any of you guys seen the movie? It's an old black and white film. All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah.
Does that? Yeah, you've seen that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's a incredible movie. I highly suggest everyone listening goes to watch it. But it's basically it sort of depicts what I sort of like to call a cycle of war, which is uh the war begins and recruitment happens. And recruitment to a bunch of these young, 18, 20-year-old guys sounds awesome. It sounds really fun. Everybody that age is eager to go and become a soldier. And then they get to the battlefield, and this is set in World War One, so trench warfare of all things. They get to the battlefield and they witness the terrors of war and realize that they were honestly duped into believing that this was meant to be a fun, heroic experience when it was just a complete tragic loss of life. And so maybe I'm not sure like what the media really was in allied countries surrounding D-Day, but I'm sure that it was exaggerated, and I'm sure that the same techniques that were echoed to make soldiers want to enlist were used to puff D-Day up as sort of a refresher to that cycle. So starting back at the beginning, um, where you have all these, you know, raising morale and making people think that war is a good, fun, heroic thing.
Yeah. If you ever read The Good War, it goes into a lot of the American experience in Europe, and I think again it kind of creates basis for a lot of foreign policy kind of going forward of this sort of culture of like liberation almost, where like it really was the epitome of like American might. And I would argue, I think one of the main effects that D-Day had was it again it just really it really cemented that global power, and in a way that like you see a lot certainly going into the Cold War, where with Vietnam almost, and kind of it set the stage for the kind of like, well, first off, it set a military precedent of overwhelming American power, and I would say a confidence in our system and the way we wage war. Like we have following World War II, you have the Korean War, and then you have Vietnam, and but those D-Day. I don't know how. Okay, no, D-Day kind of set this precedent for how we should wage wars, and how we should liberate, and how we and the might we project it like a sense of overwhelming power that we are coming. But those experiences and those separate things, those other wars we fought after, completely smashed that, and that broke that. Like that Vietnam, Korea, those were not the same experiences as World War II. Those We did not fight the same fight we fought in France. We were not, those were different things. And even going forward into like the Iraq wars and modern wars, it's like I think D-Day is one of the most it's the one of the most modern victories our culture can remember, that is sort of unites Americans. Like almost everybody knows about D-Day. Most people don't know about the Battle of Voronezh, or the like Battle of Kiev in 1941. Like no one knows about those, even though militarily they're like also massive operations that had equally big consequences on the movements of troops and everything. But like no one remembers those, and even with American campaigns, like people are D-Day stands out because it's just so that fact that we can land troops, we can move our men here from point A to point B, and get thousands of men here and win the fight in a quick manner that we've never seen before. was something new, and that definitely, in my opinion, shaped American strategy towards interventionism, kind of, which I I don't think is a necessarily a good thing, but like it is what it is, and D-Day definitely played its role in that, and kind of how we got into this sort of like, you know, the modern world. So
Right.
that's
Like, in the
yeah,
last episode, we called it the superhero complex.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Alex, Kano, y'all have been a little more quiet this episode than the last one. I guess anything.
You're calling me out?
Exactly.
I've been
Yeah, I
thinking.
was about to say.
I have a response, but go ahead, Alex, since I talked beforehand.
Yeah, I'll just say something quickly. Before World War II, you had World War One. It wasn't called World War One back then because they didn't think there would be a second one. It was called the Great War. The Great War. That's
So many
yeah.
people.
That's just
Great.
yeah. There were battles. I think there were two separate battles in which 1 million people were killed.
Yeah.
A
Oh,
Great War. Yeah. And D-Day itself is actually, yeah, Battle of the Somme, exactly. And then um D-Day itself is literally just a general military designation to signify the commencement of an operation. It's not even specifically to D-Day, and then some people have since named it things like Designated Day, Decision Day, Doomsday, or Death Day are the most common ones that I've heard. So yeah, just the power of naming things gives things power, takes away gory details, replaces them with, flowery ones. Kanoa, go ahead.
Going back to that thing of America thus having a superhero complex after World War II is something that's really interesting. Um, in my opinion, I feel like World War II was the last war that America has fought that we had a clear goal in mind, right? We were opposed to the ideals of the Nazis and the Axis powers, and we wanted to win against them. That was, in my mind, the last clear-cut goal that we've had going into war. With Korea, like what was it? Was it to drive communist force? Like it was obviously to drive communist forces out of what could be a democratic country, but did we have to like? There's a question of did we have to get involved? And then there's also Vietnam. Did we like?
we
There's a
didn't.
there was a reason why there were so many protests for, especially for the Vietnam War, because we didn't have to go in there and sacrifice. It's an empty sacrifice. That's what it was. Vietnam still fell to communism. Korea is still split today, and in my opinion, split more than ever. Um, Iraq, I don't know what happened to the. I don't have enough knowledge of the Iraqi operations to fully to fully form an opinion. But Afghanistan and other places, those were just responses to things, right? We
Yeah.
Afghanistan is more of like they hit us with 9/11, so we're gonna hit them back. It's like this, in my mind, it's like this sort of revenge system almost. And so I feel like D-Day was the last, or not D-Day, World War II was the last war that we fought that actually united America in the sense that we had a purpose. We had a singular purpose that was driving us, and we weren't split about that. So that's my opinion on the future of war set by the precedent of D-Day and World War II.
Yeah, I really like the term that you used there, empty sacrifice. That's really, yeah.
Yes. and but we don't. You don't really. And that's again, if we zoom in on D-Day specifically, you don't hear people talking about that. There's no one looks back at D-Day and was like Vietnam. If you like, or like the war on terror, like no one is like no one goes against it. No one's like, man, that was like, maybe we shouldn't have done that. It's like, that was badass, and we fucked those Germans up. Like, you know, so like, it's like if we zoom in on that, it's like it really is one of those patriotic events. But out of World War II, specifically out of all the options we have, the like the number of things you could pick in World War II, it's like D-Day is special, I think, because and it's immortalized, of course, through pop culture, but it's one of those things again where it's like it tells people that we can achieve war and decisive victories easily, unlike what we had, earlier, of course, in like World War One, and even in World War II, kind of like you don't have American victories, say for like, I think it's kind of changing now because you do have a little more media, like Midway, like the perspective of things on that, and kind of in like maybe the Pacific theater, or maybe are kind of going a different way, where it's like, okay, yeah, we did win a lot of victories there, but like, again, you can't really, like, at least I can't name something where I can ask a lot of people and they can say, we kicked butt in that operation. We kicked, where it's like, again, people aren't going to say that about Operation Husky, because it's like, most people remember that, where it's like D-Day is it's part of the American psyche at this point, and part of how, and part of how we think about what we expect victory to be. That's what we expect winning. It became the model of what winning looks like.
Yeah,
to us.
That
was very
it's one aspect of D-Day, and probably one of the most important ones, is that not only did it give a superhero complex, but it gave a certain expectation of how war should be, but an accurate one too, because if you're an American general and there are people in Congress or a certain section of the American public that wants revenge for 9/11, and you don't know where to attack. Fact is, 15 out of the 17 attackers were Saudi Arabian.